Amber was one of the strongest ink colors to play in Disney Lorcana for the first chapter. Cards like Rapunzel gifted with Healing, Stitch Rockstar, Carefree Surfer, and Ariel Spectacular Singer were very influential cards across the meta. Between these 4 cards, we can see 3 clear identities Amber likes to live in, those being Healing, Singing, and Friends. Rapunzel heals something and draws cards, Ariel searches for songs and lets you sing them early, and both Stitches highly encourage you to fill your side of the table with characters. In Disney Lorcana's upcoming set, Rise of the Floodborn, Amber certainly doesn't lose those identities and gains even more support for other underlying identities as well. With that being said, let's dive a little deeper into why you should be playing Amber in Disney Lorcana's second set, Rise of the Floodborn. Starting with what might be the most obvious synergy and something I know a lot of people were looking forward to seeing in Disney Lorcana, we've got Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. We were gifted with 3 versions of Snow White: Lost in the Forest, Unexpected Houseguest, and Well-Wisher, while Unexpected Houseguest is primarily the one that cares about dwarves having the ability to reduce their cost while she's in play. Getting her out early will ensure that you can play your Seven Dwarfs characters efficiently to start filling your board, only emphasizing one of the core identities of Amber, that being go wide, or as I like to call it, playing friends. See, one of the reasons I love Amber so much is because of this identity. In the first chapter, it was with Stitch Rockstar playing a bunch of characters so everyone can rock out, or Carefree Surfer where everyone's riding the waves on a Hawaiian roller coaster ride. Amber just embodies this warm feeling that is friends gathering together, and in this case, questing for lore, supporting each other along the way. Within the Seven Dwarfs, we can see other parts of Amber's identity peeking through, whether that's further embracing the friend strategy with Bashful needing other Seven Dwarfs in play to quest, ramping or discounting character costs through Doc, literally supporting other characters with Happy, or supporting them through other means with Grumpy, Dopey, and Sneezy. I don't think Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs will be strong enough to be viable competitively, but that's not all that matters and will certainly be a fun deck to play casually, even if you want to experience so much of what makes Amber great. One of the most defining things about Disney is their catchy, unforgettable songs. As mentioned before in the first chapter, Ariel was a powerhouse because of her ability to search for songs and sing them. Just as songs are defining for Disney films, the singing mechanic is one of the defining mechanics for Disney Lorcana. Being able to forego the cost of a card and play it essentially for free simply by exerting a character so that you can use the rest of your ink for other cards is a ton of value, which is undoubtedly why it was such a prevalent mechanic in the first chapter, and no characters sing better than Amber ones. Amber got some pretty awesome singer support in Rise of the Floodborn with Cinderella Ballroom Sensation, Gaston Baritone Bully, and Sleepy's Flute. Cinderella will be an extremely good card in Rise of the Floodborn because of her ability to sing 3-cost songs on turn 2, or at the very least because she's a 1-cost character that can sing 3-cost songs at any time. 3 is currently a breakpoint before there's a jump in song cost to more expensive, higher impact cards, but with the addition of really strong cards that cost 3 or less from Rise of the Floodborn, on top of the already strong songs and songs that will become strong from the first chapter, Cinderella hits so many cards that she'll be too good to not run in my opinion. Ariel was strong in part due to her ability to dig through your deck for songs you wanted, but also for her ability to sing 5-cost songs even though she costs 3 ink. Enter Gaston.
I use antlers in all of my decorating.
In this case, someone does sing like Gaston, but that doesn't diminish Gaston's strength as an addition to a song-heavy deck, or a substitute for Ariel if you don't have 4 of her to play. As mentioned before, 3 ink is a breakpoint for songs, and 5 ink is the next step up. This is quite the power bump too. Specifically, Grab Your Swords, A Whole New World, and Let It Go were all very popular, very strong cards that were played heavily throughout the first chapter. The only song over 3 costs from Rise of the Floodborn that might see heavy play is 4 Dozen Eggs, and what better addition for Gaston. Although he isn't as strong as Ariel in regards to playability, I wouldn't take his microphone just yet. One of the few downfalls to the singing mechanic is your characters that sing give up their opportunity to quest, and at the end of the day, if you don't quest, you don't win. Now, with Sleepy's Flute, you can gain some lore while singing. All it takes is getting 2 or 3 of these on the board, and that lore starts to stack quickly, but even having 1 to inch you closer to 20 is a good thing. To bring everything together in harmony for Amber songs, Mulan Reflecting is there to really get you the most value out of your songs if you can manage to catch them on the top of your deck. She doesn't have an efficient shift target, so you won't be able to shift Mulan on turn 2, but you can still play Mulan Free Spirit to shift her for 2 ink on turn 4 if you'd like. Mulan definitely needs to be a build around in my opinion, and again, songs by themselves don't win you games, but I'll be interested to see if an all-in songs or an all-in harmony deck will be good enough to play competitively. If it isn't competitive, at the very least it'll be fun. Rapunzel gifted with Healing was a staple card in the first chapter because the value from healing your character for up to 3 damage, then drawing the number of cards for each damage healed was too good to pass up. It seriously punished opponents for leaving your characters damaged and made them second guess questing with their characters on the chance you challenge them to get more value out of Rapunzel. Now, there were plenty of other cards that removed damage like Timon, Healing Glow, and Dinglehopper, but they never got played because the value wasn't necessarily the damage removal, it was the draw. While Rise of the Floodborn is continuing to embrace the healing identity through cards like Nana, King Louie, Snow White Lost in the Forest, and Hold Still, I'm most excited for the Rapunzels we see instead. Rapunzel Sunshine sort of fits into the category of the previous cards mentioned because all her ability does is remove damage like the others. On its own, that isn't super impactful, but paired with Rapunzel Gifted Artist, all of these healing cards all of a sudden have a huge upside to their effects. Not to mention if you pair Rapunzel with Grandpappy, then you're really cooking. But we won't spend a lot of time on that. Just know if the healing package is the route you want to take, Sapphire is a great place to start. Just like how Rapunzel Gifted with Healing was so strong because of how punishing she could be, Rapunzel Gifted Artist will be similarly punishing. Amber Steel Songs was a top deck in the first chapter due to its utilization of songs and card draw to stay in the game, and for this reason I also expect some of these new Amber healing cards, specifically Rapunzel Gifted with Artist, to see play competitively. Pair them with everything going on in Sapphire, and Amber's gonna have a good time. As mentioned earlier, Stitch Rockstar and Carefree Surfer played huge roles in the first chapter as well. Both cards in their own way encourage building wide boards to overwhelm your opponent in order to win. With Rockstar, it's playing cheap characters to keep drawing cards, to keep playing characters, to keep drawing cards, and with Carefree Surfer, it's a little slower in just establishing a strong board presence with at least 2 characters, then Stitch rides in with a difficult to deal with body that can either challenge and help keep board control, or quest and force the opponent to deal with all that willpower while refilling your hand. In case you haven't caught on yet, drawing cards is really good. We've already covered dwarfs and how they expand on this identity of going wide, but they aren't the only cards in Rise of the Floodborn that do this. Christopher Robin does this as well by gaining 2 lore every time Christopher Robin is readied if you have 2 or more other characters in play. I don't think this card has enough support to be very good right now, and you're forced into Ruby because it's the only ink color that has ways to ready Christopher Robin multiple times in a turn. It certainly encourages you to build wide boards, but I think it's a lot of pieces that have to come together for a payoff that ultimately doesn't win you the game. Besides him, we have one of Amber's legendary cards, Mufasa Betrayed Leader. Mufasa supports a go wide or more friend strategy by hoping to reveal a character off the top of your deck that will replace him once he's banished. I think this could be a very strong ability, especially if you can play him in a character heavy deck that plays a lot of top end so that you get to play expensive and impactful units for free. This could be a card you build an entire deck around, or just one you slot into a more mid-range control deck anyway because it won't be hard to get value from him. So I definitely expect to see this card played. One more card that got revealed early on that is a major expansion on more friends is Zero to Hero. Zero to Hero is going to allow you to build up a wide board, then sing this song and play really expensive characters like Stitch Carefree Surfer, Mickey Mouse Friendly Face, and others way earlier and cheaper than you'd normally like to. The caveat to this card is that you almost always have to sing it because even if you have 2 characters on board and you spend 2 ink to play the card, you're breaking even, making the card useless and essentially throwing away a card. Decks that play Zero to Hero are going to need to go all in on the more friend strategy and really play to its strengths, overwhelming the opponent with characters before they can play cards like Be Prepared or Grab Your Sword to wipe everything clean. But I think in the right build, Zero to Hero can seriously pop off. Now that I've covered the 3 what I consider main identities worth exploring in Amber in the first chapter and how Rise of the Floodborn adds to those, I wanted to highlight some other underlying identities that either didn't see much play or are seeing more support with the other Rise of the Floodborn Amber cards. Moana and Princesses were a popular and very fun casual build in the first chapter. Don't get me wrong, we've already talked about how strong some of the other princesses in Amber were, so don't take this as me claiming that princesses are weak. I think the opposite is true. Unfortunately, Moana was quickly cut in lists that featured those other strong princesses for more impactful cards pretty early on. We've already gone over most of the princesses in Amber coming with Rise of the Floodborn except for Snow White Well-Wisher, which I think will be strong, but I'll talk about that later for another identity getting a little help from this set. Otherwise, there aren't any other directly synergistic cards for the princess package except for Grand Duke, which I think will be helpful, but not enough to push the princess archetype up enough to break into the competitive sphere. Certainly good enough to run at your local league for some casual games or for multiplayer though. One of the biggest problems princesses ran into was their lack of strength, or at the very least, the ones that were impactful enough to play had difficulty trading with the opponent when needed. Grand Duke obviously helps with this, giving princesses extra strength, but I also think cards like Last Stand and potentially World's Greatest Criminal Mind could really help them in this aspect as well. Being able to challenge a character with Rapunzel, then banish them with Last Stand after having quested and readied with Moana would be very helpful. We're also getting other princesses like Raya and Cinderella and other ink colors colors that might help the archetype out some, but this is about the extent of support we see for Amber princesses. Another archetype in Amber that wasn't very developed but was actually pretty strong was recursion. Recursion is just the act of bringing cards back from the discard. Part of Your World is a song that does this, but it didn't see nearly as much play as Hades' Lord of the Underworld did. Hades has a really simple ability that says when you play this character, return a character card from your discard to your hand. And this was a great ability at getting back those threats like Stitch Carefree Surfer and Rockstar from the discard if your opponent had ways to remove them after they had been played. Cards like these keep the pressure on your opponent by being able to continually replay your good cards that require answers. Eventually, your opponent will run out of ways to deal with the characters you keep throwing at them, and you'll overwhelm them enough to take over the game and win. Sometimes you could play a Hades to bring back another Hades, which you could play to bring back another Hades, which you might save to do that all over again once those Hades were banished.
Yes, Hades rule!
With Rise of the Floodborn, Mufasa is kind of the opposite of this, but applies the same principle of using a body to bring back or replace another body, keeping heavy pressure on your opponent through characters on board. Except Mufasa takes cards from your deck, and he goes into the discard. Alternatively, Snow White Well-Wisher works a lot like Hades. Whenever she quests, you may return a character from your discard to your hand. Snow White's ability isn't on play and requires you to quest in order for it to trigger, which makes it inherently worse than Hades, but she is a Floodborn, which means you can shift her out instead of play her, then you can quest immediately and get the same effect. Not only that, but she has a much higher willpower than Hades, which is going to make her much more difficult to banish before she's able to quest and get the ability off. Also, if she can quest multiple times, she can recur multiple cards. In those ways, she's much better than Hades. Snow White really takes recursion and gives it a card that you can build around much better than you could with Hades and Part of Your World. With all of these pieces, it'll be much easier to build a deck whose entire strategy is bringing things back from the discard and replaying them. We'll have to wait and see how powerful that strategy is, and I think both Hades and Snow White are good cards that play specific roles, but at the very least, I think it'll be one worth trying. One of the other identities Amber had going for it was a little bit of ramp, but not the traditional way like Sapphire. In the first chapter, there were lanterns, which was an item that would let you discount character cost and over time essentially require you to have to ink less and get expensive characters out faster. There was also Just in Time that frequently let you play 5-cost characters on turn 3. In Rise of the Floodborn, we have Mufasa, which in his own way can ramp out expensive cards before you'd be able to play them, and Zero to Hero, which does the same thing, but we've already mentioned those. There is one more card that got revealed very early and supports this kind of play in Amber as well, Mickey Mouse Friendly Face. This Mickey lets you pay 3 less ink for the next character you play that turn after questing, which is a huge discount. Pair this with lanterns or get Mickey out early with Zero to Hero, and you can both play expensive characters really early or play lots of expensive characters for cheap. Being able to both quest for 3 lore and discount characters for 3 ink is a ton of value, and because of that, I think Mickey will definitely see play. Other than that, there were some combat tricks throughout Amber that usually reduce the strength of opposing characters, but that didn't really see play at all. In Rise of the Floodborn, we see combat tricks through strength manipulation with Grand Duke, Grumpy, and Happy, but again, we've already touched on those. By themselves, I don't think they're super strong, but are okay in the decks they're intended to be run in. On the other hand, we have the Queen commanding presence, and I think that's a whole other conversation. Because we have a 1-cost Queen, the Queen commanding presence can be shifted out on turn 2, which could be really big. Just looking at the card, that's a 4 strength, 3 willpower with 2 lore card that can sing for 5 on turn 2. I think there are other cards in Rise of the Floodborn that can keep up with this combo, but it's still a strong one. The biggest thing is her ability, which lets you give a character -4 strength and also give a character +4 strength when she quests. This essentially means if the Queen is on board, you can make very favorable trades that would otherwise be unfavorable by reducing an opponent's strength to 0 and boosting a friend's strength so that it can banish the opponent in one challenge, all while questing. This should often lead to 2-for-1 trades or more, which can really shift the tides in a board state. Not only do I think the Queen will be solid on her own, but we also have cards like Panic, Pete, and Alice who all care about their strength being buffed so that they gain extra lore. A single ability use of the Queen on Pain or Pete will get their strength to the threshold needed to gain extra lore, and if you use both the Queen's ability and her to support Alice, that puts Alice just 1 strength shy of reaching her benchmark as well. All of this to say, typically I don't think simple combat tricks were very good in the first chapter, and I don't think they will be for Rise of the Floodborn either, but the Queen is definitely the exception to that. And that's pretty much Amber in a nutshell. Amber is a phenomenal ink color to play with in Disney Lorcana, and a strong one at that. Whether it's songs, healing, recursion, ramp, or just playing as many of your favorite characters as possible, Amber proved in the first chapter that it is an ink that should be taken seriously and is super fun to play. It's my personal favorite ink, and I think it's only going going to get better in Rise of the Floodborn. And for all of the reasons stated above, if any of those strategies strike your fancy, I think you should try picking this ink up. But I'm interested in your thoughts. What do you think about all the cards Amber brings for Rise of the Floodborn? Were there any archetypes or strategies you think I missed? Maybe Amber isn't for you. Then what ink would you like me to cover next? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I really appreciate all of your support. My socials for Twitter and Instagram are always in the description below if you want them. In case you don't know, myself and Jonty from the Inkwell host a live show called This Week in Ink every Monday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on his channel, and I'll link that below as well. Check out the previous live streams if you're interested, and come say hi next time we're live. Most importantly, don't forget to take care of yourself. My name is Brandon, also known as B Squared. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.